welcome everyone to our second webinar in our webinar series, Starting the Year with Purpose. This specific webinar, we're going to explore proactive practices and strategies that help to lay the foundation or the groundwork for helping to support students with self-discipline, so teaching self-discipline. I am one of your hosts this evening. I am Jane Kofi. I'm coming to you from my home in Virginia. I am currently the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and prior to joining the Center for Responsive Schools and the Programs Department, which brings you part of the responsive classroom approach, I was a classroom teacher. I taught everything from pre-K through 5th grade in both public and private school settings for 20 years before joining the Center for Responsive Schools full-time. And I am joined by my incredible colleague and friend, Dr. Joe Tilley.
Thank you, Jane. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I'm so excited to be here. My role is a little different, and I will let everybody know what that is in just a moment. But just a little bit about myself. I work with Jane in the programs department. I work in the research side of things. I'm the program research manager, and so I focus a little bit on our research side of our programs. But I'm honored and privileged to work with Jane. And before I came into this role, I was a curriculum and instructional designer. And before that, I worked in the presenting department when it was still the CNC department, and was a full-time presenter as well as consultant for a while. Prior to that, I was a classroom teacher, special education. I've done everything from K to 8, pull in, push out, inclusion, self-contained, everything just about in between. Have had a couple of district level roles. I was a district level coach here in the Nashville area, which is where I live. And I was a district level coach for special education. And then at one time, I was the interim director of special education for a neighboring county here in the Nashville area. But I'm excited to be here with Jane because as she was talking about a little bit earlier, the proactive side of discipline is such a unique place, and it was an area where I know I made a lot of difference within my classroom in focusing on the proactive side of things. And so with that, again, I just want to say how excited I am to be here tonight. I did see some names come up in the chat box that I've worked with, talked to, had the opportunity to present with, and I'm so excited to see that. And as well as again, yeah. So and again, I just want to take a moment to welcome everybody coming from so many different places, and it's such a cool thing. Jane and I spend a lot of time collaborating, and we've spent a lot of time over the past few years talking about the changes that are going on in education. And of course, coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing some different things. And so looking forward to talking about that tonight. My role for the evening is going to be to work what Jane and I call the back end of the webinar. And that's going to be, I'm going to be taking care of any of the questions that you might have. The question and answer tab that's in your toolbar at the bottom, you can open that up and you can send a question through that, and I'll be happy to answer it if it's something that I can answer. And then at the end, during the question and answer session, I can pose that to Jane. But I want to make you aware of that. Speaking of, the toolbar at the bottom has any number of tools for you. There's the chat function. You're feel free to, if you connect with something, you can always put things in there. I will say this, people will be able to see what you say. Jane and I will be able to see it. We can see ourselves, and we can see the presentation. We can't see you all, and no one else can see you all. And so I just want to go ahead and let you know, which kind of leads me to just a couple of helpful hints when running webinars. If you're finding that you're having some stability problems, you can close all your programs down, all your browsers, that sort of thing. If for whatever reason you lose the connection and you have to leave, just come right on back in. We'll be happy to let you back in. There's the question and answer feature. And so if you have any questions or answers, feel free. The chat function is there to make connections, and I think there'll probably be some moments tonight where we're going to ask you to drop some comments and some things into that. So just make sure you're familiar with that. And then lastly, the question that we probably get the most, which is whether or not there will be an opportunity to get a recording of this. And the answer is yes. So within a few days, if you registered for this, you will get the recording for it. And so that will come through. Jane and I are excited for tonight. And I know that she's left some time at the end for some question and answers. And so with that, I am going to kick it over to one of my most favorite people and back over to Jane.
Thanks, Joe. All right. So thanks for sharing all that information with us, Joe, so that everyone has a good sense of how this webinar will go, but then also recognizing that really we're going to focus on the proactive strategies and practices that help lay the foundation, that groundwork for making it so that we're creating an environment where students feel safe and they feel that sense of belonging, but also set students up to learn and setting us up to teach self-discipline at the same time. So when these are in place, it really helps with that. So here are the goals that we hope to cover tonight. So I'm going to give you a moment to look those over and just really taking a look at focusing on maybe one that you really want to hold on to through our time together this evening, or perhaps thinking about, okay, so I came to this webinar to find out about how this works to strengthen relationships or how that might help support in laying the foundation for teaching self-discipline for students. So I'll give you a moment to read those over and we'll jump right in. All right. So to help us kind of get grounded in what we're going to think about this evening, I'm going to pose a question for you. And with this question, I want you to take a moment to think about your response and then using the chat feature, share your response in the chat box. So here's the question. What comes to mind for you when you hear the word discipline? So take a moment and think, and then using the chat feature, share what comes to mind for you when you hear the word discipline. Yeah. Consequences, punishment, structure, yeah. Self-control, to teach, working hard, so many. I'm seeing we have lots of similar ideas. I'm seeing consequences and behavior and rules and structure, teaching, practice. Those are coming up quite a bit in the chat. So if you haven't had an opportunity to see them, because they're coming by fast, take a moment and scroll through and see what other colleagues and educators are sharing about what comes to mind for you when you hear the word discipline. Oh yeah, so many things. Learning, self-control, yeah. Self-regulation. Classroom management, so many different things. When we think about the word discipline, sometimes just based on our experiences, I know with school or when you were a student in school or just from various experiences in general with family or even with friends, we have different perceptions of the word discipline, whether we connect all of those different ideas to things that we've experienced, or maybe even connecting those ideas to the way that we support students in the classroom. Many of the different ideas that we have for discipline help drive what we do with students to help support them in being successful. That being said, some of the things that came up in the chat box connect very much so with what we think about and what comes to mind when we think about discipline in the responsive classroom and using the responsive classroom approach. So when we think about discipline, one of the first things that comes to mind for educators who have used the responsive classroom approach or have dabbled in it a little bit or are learning about it is that discipline is something that can be taught. And some of the things that came to the chat, I saw the word teach, I saw the word learn, I saw different studies. Like sometimes when people say, you know, what discipline are you studying? That's another thing that comes to mind when people think about discipline. And discipline derives from the Latin word meaning to learn. And so it means that we have the opportunity as educators to take the word discipline and associate it with opportunities that are positive so students can see that discipline is connected to the opportunities to teach and to learn. So that means teachers have the opportunity to create situations in which they're teaching socially responsible behaviors and positive behaviors for students. Things like how it looks and sounds and feels when you're cooperating, or assertiveness or responsibility. And I saw it many times, self-control, empathy, and helping students to navigate those skills so that they can be successful, not just in our classrooms, but outside of our classrooms as well. And so if we're helping support students in those ways, we want to have our mindset set in a way that we're thinking about discipline as an opportunity to teach students skills that help them be successful. So we want to not only provide those opportunities for students to learn those socially responsible behaviors, but we also want to give them opportunities, and I saw this in the chat too, to practice and to reinforce those behaviors too. And so just like we would in any content area, so if you're teaching a student, multi-step addition, or sorry, maybe multi-step multiplication or division, something like that, and you're teaching students those particular, we don't just hand it to them and say, okay, you should be able to do this. We actually walk them through the steps so that they can be successful with that. So if students are learning how to add a 2-digit number to a 3-digit number, we walk them through the steps for how they might go about doing that. And in most cases, we give them multiple strategies so that they can be successful with that particular skill. The same is true when it comes to learning discipline and discipline skills. So things like, what does it look like when I am showing self-control? Keeping in mind, self-control is tricky, not just for students, but also for adults. Maybe we don't always think about it that way, but say you have your self-control all together when you're in the library, but maybe when you're driving in traffic and somebody maybe gets in front of you without like signaling or making a lot of room, maybe your self-control looks a little bit different. The same is true for students. Maybe in English or in a Latin class, they have a lot of self-control. Or maybe at the beginning of the day, they have a lot of self-control, but as the day goes on, or when they're in different situations, self-control looks different. They have different skills that are required for them to be successful. And so then that does affect how they behave in class and what they do. So as we think about opportunities to teach, if I know like students are going to be going to an assembly or a school-wide event at the end of the day, they're going to be really anxious or excited about that, or maybe even nervous. I'm going to make sure that I address things like that beforehand so that when we get to that moment at that time of the day, students feel better equipped for that. Just like if you were going to prepare a student for assessment, you want to let them know what's on the assessment so that they can be successful with that particular assessment later on. This also allows for students to feel like they can take risks and that mistakes are okay. And when this happens, students feel seen and they feel heard, and they're more available for learning because we're meeting their needs for belonging. We're meeting their needs for significance, and we're allowing them to feel that sense of engagement in that space. I'm going to, in just a moment, put in the chat a link to a link that will provide some additional information about the goals of discipline from a teacher belief, a study that was done, so that we can just kind of see a little bit more. Feel free to take a look at that at any time, but it's just something else to kind of keep our minds grounded in the fact and the idea that with discipline, the more that we do proactively, it supports students in being successful. With that being said, in the responsive classroom approach, much of what we do is proactive. It doesn't mean that there are things or times or places or situations in which we won't be reactive, but when we're doing things proactively, it cuts down on the amount of things we're doing reactively. We want to be fire preventers rather than firefighters, constantly putting out fires. And I will be honest, when we spend a lot of time being proactive with discipline and doing all the things that we need to do to lay the groundwork at that foundation, it is exhausting, but it's the exhausting positive work that we're doing as opposed to the exhausting negative of constantly having to put out fires throughout the day. And then students aren't learning, and we're probably a different kind of exhausted by the end of the day. So a large part of what we're doing is proactive for a reason. It allows for us to be able to meet the needs of students, set that stage positively at the start of the year that builds that sense of belonging for students and significance for students, and allowing us to build positive relationships with students and allowing them to build positive relationships with one another. And so if we're setting this up at the start of the year or setting this up early, it allows for us to spend less time being reactive and more time being proactive. So we're going to take a moment to do a really quick activity to help us think about one of those pieces where we're building relationships with students. That's a key foundational piece when we think about being successful with proactive steps to discipline. So if you've got a sheet of paper close by or a sticky note close by or your phone, where you can open up a notes page, or if you have nothing close by and you're just going to think about this, or if that's just the way you process, that's perfectly fine. But I'm going to give you a quick stop and jot activity to do. And in this activity, here's what I want you to do on a piece of paper or something close by. It can even be on your laptop. Just pull up a Word document or something. Here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about the students you work with and jot down their names. And if you don't have anything to write with or anything close by, just kind of think in your mind, like all the students that come to mind for you. And if you have, like you teach several periods of French, maybe just choose one class period to focus on and thinking about those students. And next to each student's name, jot down one thing that you know about that student that is not school related. So that can be something you found out about them in the first few weeks of school. Maybe it's something you just recently found out. Maybe you do surveys or something at the beginning of the year, so you found out something about students that way. But take a moment, think about the students you work with, and then also one thing that you know about the student that's not school related. I'm going to give you maybe like 40 seconds. So take about 40 seconds to think through that, and then I'll give us next steps. So maybe for you, perhaps all the names just came out. You were just like a student after student. And maybe there were some students' names that came to mind more easily than others. Maybe perhaps for you, there were students for whom you knew many things about for whatever reason. Perhaps you had siblings that you taught, and so this is another sibling from that family. Maybe they live in your neighborhood. Perhaps you've seen them for different class periods for different subject areas. And maybe perhaps there are a few people or few students that you jotted down some things, and mostly what you can think about for these students is something related to academics, something academically related, or something that you found out about them during school, like they were in the school play, or they were in this particular club, but something that you found out that was in school related situations. An exercise like this really kind of helps us see where we've been building really strong connections with students, and also allows us to see some areas where we can strengthen some connections. So maybe as you were thinking about students, the ones who came to mind, you're like, I know a lot about them because I've connected with them in whatever way. And maybe for some other students, you're thinking, I know them, but I don't know as much about them as I would like to know. Building strong and positive relationships with students is one of the very first steps in being proactive with discipline. When students know that you know them, it changes how they are and how they act, but also changes your relationship. So when something does arise, when a child does make a mistake, you already have that relationship to be able to connect with them and help them work through it and teach them what's going to help them be successful. Think of it this way. If a complete stranger comes up to you and you're in a situation where maybe you didn't make the best choice, and then they have something to say about it, you may not respond as well to someone who knows you really well and they respond to you in that situation. Relationships are really important. So I want you to use the chat box feature in just a moment. I want you to respond to this question. What are some ways that you work to build and strengthen positive relationships with the students you work with? Take a moment to think, and as soon as you're ready, use the chat box feature to share those ideas. Yeah, absolutely. Having fun with students is really important. Morning meeting, giving them attention. Conversations are powerful. Yeah, Kathy, getting to know them. One-on-one meetings, absolutely. Lets them feel seen and heard. finding ways to connect with them, finding things you have in common with students, asking them questions. Yes. See, some people are like, I use responsive advisory meeting, I use morning meeting to do that, lots of games and activities, just having regular conversations with students. Surveys to families and to students. Yes, sitting with them at lunch. Also, yes, when you find out you have something in common with students, that is a game changer. Different prompts to find out more about them. Hanging out with them at recess and lunch. Yes, so many great ideas. So many things that we do to build those positive relationships, but also strengthen relationships and keep those going with students. If you haven't had the opportunity, because they were coming by fast, if you didn't have the opportunity to see them, take a moment and look at those, because we do know if we're setting the foundation so that most of what we do with discipline is proactive, relationships are really key. And so thinking about all the things that people just shared, I saw many of the things that I'm going to share with you now about strengthening those relationships and some strategies that we can use to do that. One of the very first ones is observing students, just watching them. Watch who they gravitate towards, watch what things they lean into when you have conversations about certain things, what things they shy away from, what things make them feel comfortable, what things are they enthusiastic or interested in, paying attention to the conversations they have, what they talk about, what they don't talk about, what they're shying away from, but even being able to observe students as they walk into your space. So if you're standing at an entryway or a doorway, as they come in and greeting them, it's a great way to check the pulse of each child. And when I say that, I mean being able to see this child's really tired this morning, or this student seems upset about something this morning, and being able to then reach out and connect with that student because you're noticing that as they walk in. Another thing is using students' names. Names are a really important part of our identity. They really are. And learning students' names is really important. And not just learning their names, but also how they want to pronounce them or what they want to be called. It is a tricky thing when, and I know because sometimes it happens where you have a student and their name may be a little bit trickier for you to pronounce or to say. One of the most powerful things you can do is to continue to try. It is one way that a student can be told that you matter just by trying to make sure that you're learning their names. And if you get it wrong, that's okay. You can let students know, you know what, I know I'm not getting this right. I'm going to keep trying, keep reminding me, hold me accountable for learning your name. And maybe by the end of the year, I will get it right. But it is a powerful thing to know a student's name and to continue to try. You may or may not have been in a situation where someone comes up to you and they're like, hey, you, and you know they don't know your name, but they're having a really nice conversation with you, but it feels different and it sits differently when you can tell that person doesn't know your name. And so a name is a really powerful and important thing. Especially because maybe perhaps there is a name that you're not able to say. Instead of giving the student a name that works better for you, you can always ask the student. You can say, so I've been trying to say your name. Tell me what I can do to either do this better, or is there something that you prefer for me to say, or how I should call you that would really work for you? Instead of giving children nicknames that work really well for us, we want to really make sure they're seen and heard. And that means the name that they chose or that they go by is the name that we call them. It also allows them to know that you see them and that they're important and they matter. The other piece when we think about a strategy that helps to strengthen relationships with students is considering developmental characteristics. If you've worked with a grade level for a long time, or even if you haven't, I've changed grade levels numerous times. And one of the things I found that was really important was learning about the developmental characteristics in each of the grade levels that I taught. It's a powerful thing to know that, you know, fifth graders or 10-year-olds are constantly thinking about what's just and what's fair. And if you know that about them, you can also support, because remember, it's part of teaching. That discipline piece is that means they may argue about various things, and they're not arguing just to be argumentative, but they're trying to understand the world around them. And if we know this, then we can support them by giving them the skills to do that in a respectful way that allows them to maintain relationships with their classmates too. So, you know, I hear what you're saying. I have a difference of opinion goes further than just, no, you're wrong. And so helping students learn those skills so that you can help them not only build relationships with you, but with their classmates too. Since we know that building relationships helps to create this climate in which students feel a sense of belonging, feel a sense of safety, feel significance, we also can see that as a proactive step to discipline. If students feel safe in the space where they are, if students feel that sense of belonging, they're more likely to learn and they're more likely to be successful doing it. And so we want to offer those opportunities for students to do that in ways that are going to be positive for them. So as we create these spaces in which students feel safe, where they feel heard, where they feel that sense of belonging, and they can express themselves, they can make mistakes, we want to continue to be proactive and do the proactive work that helps to set the conditions for teaching self-discipline. And we can do this by helping students once we know them first, and once we've had the opportunity to really know them, and helping them then move on to thinking about what are some hopes and dreams they have? What are some goals that they have for themselves for this year? And so we want to give the opportunity to establish these hopes and dreams for students, these goals for students, because they have a strong impact on the class community. It allows students to be invested not only just in their learning, but also in the community that you're building with students. And that goes a long way when we are allowing for that to happen in our spaces. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can set goals with students to help continue to be proactive and take those proactive steps to supporting students with discipline. The very first thing is to set the context. In most cases, and there's some that are different and unique, but in most cases, students haven't been in, say, Latin 1 before, or students haven't been in 4th grade before, or they haven't been in US History 1. And so when they come into that space, it's really important that we set the context by letting them know what are the different things that the students are going to learn in that space. So in your classroom, in your space, in that role, you want to be able to make it clear for students what they're going to be learning. So what are they going to be doing this year? You can share previous artifacts, photographs, projects, pictures, PowerPoints, video, things that students are going to be learning to get them excited about what's going to be happening in that class, in that year, so that they're able to create goals that are attainable. So for example, if we're setting the context and we want to make sure that students are getting a sense of what it is that they might learn in that age or in that role or in that space or in that class, being able to share with them something that maybe you've noticed that all students in that class really enjoy. You know, my daughter's class, one of the things they do in their science systems classes, they learn about different climates, different landforms, different textures, but the teacher goes even further to tell them at the end of the year, they take a trip to Iceland if they want to, if they choose to study the different climates, to study the landforms, to study the land there. And to set them up for that, she tells them about everything that they need to learn in order to be successful with this end of the year culminating trip. And so now students can be excited about that and can be thinking about, oh, I'm going to be learning this. And that's going to be really helpful for me because then I want to set a goal or I want to have a hope and dream focused on this particular aspect so that I can be successful in another area. The other thing we want to do is using qualifiers to be clear in helping students establish their goals or their hopes and dreams so that they're attainable. So it's something that they can actually do in your classroom space or in your setting. So if without those parameters, without those qualifiers, if we were just to say to students, you know, what's a goal that you want to set for yourself for this year? I mean, it could be anything. It could be, I'd like to learn basketball this year. And maybe you're a US history teacher. Or I would like to go to an amusement park and you're thinking in 3rd grade, that's not part of our curriculum or our agenda. That makes it really challenging for you to support children in reaching or attaining their goals in your class. So adding qualifiers like, what do you hope to learn in this French 2 class this year? And having just context to bring into that so students can create hopes and dreams or create goals that are really connected to the learning that's going to happen that you're going to be able to support them with so they can be successful with that. And then also connecting students to the rules. And we do that by looking at what they do or what they choose for their hopes and dreams and their goals and connecting those to the rules. The rules are another tangible piece that's a big step in setting up a proactive space for discipline. When children come up with their hopes and their dreams or their goals for the year, we want to ground them in something that they know. So if my goal, say Jane's goal this year, is to become a stronger reader, then if she wants to become a stronger reader, the rules that we have for our space, the guidelines that we have for our space, whether they're ones that we create with the entire class, or there are rules that we create that are already there. Maybe they're rules that are school-wide. Maybe they're rules that you've already had in your class, but we want to see how they're connected. So if I want to become a stronger reader, then maybe a rule about respecting everyone is what we need in our class, so that I'm respecting my goal, but I'm also respecting the goals of other students in the class so that they can also be successful. When we connect the rules to our goals, students see where they are not only coming from, the rules, but then also that they are specifically in place to help students be successful. So they're not just, here are all the rules that I came up with, and they're not really connected to my hopes and dreams, but they're not really connected to our goals. They're just kind of like these rules that I'm not sure where they came from. Students can now see that the rules that they have are directly connected to them being successful based on the hopes and dreams or the goals that they have. So to help students understand how the rules support their goals, it may be, for depending on your age group and the group that students that you work with. In elementary, we would do a lot of collaborative rulemaking, and in which case, maybe with your younger learners, it may happen over a series of days. So if these are all of our hopes and dreams, like this person wants to become stronger reader, this person wants to make more friends, this person wants to learn all about different types of math strategies. If these are all of our hopes and dreams, what rules need to be in place so that this person can be a stronger reader, and this person can become a friend to others and make more friends, and this person can learn lots of math strategies? What do we need in our class? And they usually fall into some specific categories, like thinking about rules that help or support self, rules that help and support our classroom community, but then also rules that help and support the materials that we have. And so that students are able to then give you many different rules that they think their class needs. And in most cases, depending on the age group, students will say things like, don't hit, don't run, those types of things. But eventually, what you're going to help students do is consolidate those rules down so that maybe if we're not going to hit, what are we going to use? Or what are we going to do? We're going to use kind hands, or we're going to be kind with the people around us, or we're going to be respectful, depending on the age group, so that those words are appropriate for the age group that you're working with. So students know these are the types of rules that work. With middle school, and Joe, I may have you jump in if you hear something that makes sense and a place to jump in there. When it comes to middle schoolers, it looks a little bit different. So they wouldn't necessarily be creating hopes and dreams, but SMART goals makes more sense for your older learners. Am I getting that correct, Joe? And so the process would look different too. So it wouldn't look exactly the same. And I'm going to let you feel like you're ready to speak into that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're 100% right. Yeah, just from a developmental aspect, when we get into the middle grades, they're able to set more goals, and we try to make those SMART goals because we want them to be something that allows them to invest themselves into the classroom, into the rules, into the expectations, and things such as that. I will tell you that in my experience and the things that I've heard from numerous educators, students have a pretty good idea of what it is that they want to accomplish. They don't always know how to set the goal. And so where you may have to spend a lot of your time is really helping them to try to figure out, like, if this is what I want to accomplish, what is the actual goal and what are the things I'm going to have to do in order for that to occur. And when you do that, it does allow you a little bit more. I will say that it allows students to be much more invested, so that when you're talking about rules and expectations, you get to have conversations about those exist to keep us safe and to help us achieve our goals. And so it becomes a situation where they're more invested, because it's not as much feeling like it is a sense of control as much as it is a sense of investment. So yeah, you're 100% on the money on that one, Jane.
Thanks for sharing that, Joe. I appreciate that. All right. So in, I just saw a comment come through. Absolutely. And so in thinking about that piece, and now that you say that, Joe, I'm going to put two things in the chat for our group this evening. One is if you're thinking about the rule creation process, starting with hopes and dreams for your elementary learners, there's a planning guide that you can use that will help walk you through those steps. And if you're thinking about middle school and more of what Joe was referring to, there's also a guide that'll help you walk through those steps and setting that up for students. So I'm going to put that in the chat so that we have that. And so you're welcome to use those tools. You can also find them on our website. And if that helps you create that process and work through that process with students, that'll allow you to be able to set them up in a way that they can be successful.
And Jane, if I could,
yes, please.
It reminded me of something that I think is overlooked as one of the more important pieces. We often tend to set our goals right at the beginning, and then sometimes it's easy, especially like when you're a teacher, if you've got 20 kids that you're working with all day long, or you've got 120 that are coming in and out of your room all day long, it can be really hard to remember to review those goals and to check on them and to check in and things like that. But I will tell you that in order to keep that level of investment high, that you do have to go back and revisit those things. You have to go back and think about what those rules are, what those expectations are. Are they still matching up with your goals and things like that? And I always tell people that the best people that you can talk to about whether or not the rules and the expectations still make sense toward what you're trying to accomplish is your students. Just having those kind of conversations. So really think in terms of having a plan to revisit those goals, those hopes, those dreams, so that they don't become something that's just one and done.
Right. Absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out, Joe, because that is a key piece in that we want to be able to revisit them. And I know when I first started Hopes and Dreams with students, we created them. We spent so much time in building the context for that, and then making sure that students could share their goals and everyone knew whose goals were whose, and then they kind of just stayed there. And we created the rules with them, but then I never spent time when I first started doing it, going back to what goals were met, what hopes and dreams students had met. And there were ones that we should have celebrated because, oh my goodness, you did become a stronger reader, or you were able to try out this new strategy, or you started liking science again, but I didn't go back to make sure. And so you can imagine what that would feel like as a student when you create this goal. And if you're thinking about it and then no one else is, and especially the person who said, this is something really important that we should be doing, but I'm just not going to go back to it. And there's where it stays. And then actually we're revisiting it, because what Joe said before, going back, it lets you see, do these rules still work for our classroom community? Yeah.
And Jane, you have brilliantly outlined the foundation for this. I mean, it's so the connecting that would be my dog. They clearly are not invested in the expectations at our home. I wanted to say to you that the thing that is so oftentimes it really gets lost in this whole process is the fact that you have this foundation that you lay. And then as the year goes on, it's because you build such a strong community that students get comfortable. They start to make consistent misbehaviors. They start to have the same type of off-task behaviors. And it's a testament to the fact that you've created a classroom community where people are comfortable and that sort of thing. But where we end up making the mistake is forgetting to remember that the more proactive we are, the less reactive we have to be. And so what we do is we think in terms of if I've got a class of 20 and 15 of them seem to be struggling, then I need to go back and take a look at at things again. And so it's just remembering that proactive side of things is where you want to spend as much of your time as you can. And I apologize for my dog in the background.
You're fine. You're absolutely fine.
Sorry.
So we've shared a lot of information with you tonight, and I want you to think about this question. So consider all that we've shared, and many of you have shared some really strong ideas in the chat. So as your colleagues were saying, what about this? And people sharing books and people sharing things that they do in their class. Also think about that. If you got an idea from something that someone put in the chat, definitely consider that as well. But what is one key insight you've gained from today's webinar? So it could be something you read in the chat. It could be something that came through in the Q&A or something that we shared this evening. Take a moment and add that to the chat box. What's something that you gained from our time together? I'll give you a moment to do that. Oh yes, because someone did talk about hopes and dreams of families. Remembering that discipline can be taught. Starting with those hopes and dreams, yeah. Revisiting them. So not like what I did when I first started, but actually going back to them and making sure that you connect. I saw someone put in the chat that they do it every quarter. They go back to their hopes and dreams every quarter. Mm-hmm. Checking in with students. Kind hands, yes. Yes, revisiting the rules. So you may have come up with rules at the beginning of the year and you find out they're just not working for your group. You revisit them and you find out what's going to work better for your classroom community.
And Jane, just throwing in one thing as people were putting it in, because it reminded me when revisiting the rules, as your students are growing developmentally, sometimes the expectations are going to change because
Good point.
They've gotten stronger skills.
Good point. Absolutely. And so as you're noticing developmentally, your 7-year-olds are now 8-year-olds. That might mean looking back at your rules and see if they still match your 8-year-old learners now instead of your 7-year-old learners, to make sure that it actually is supporting your classroom community. I'm going to share with you a few resources that are really helpful when you're thinking about teaching self-discipline. One of them is called Teaching Self-Discipline, and this one is for elementary, and the other one is Seeing the Good in Students, and it's a guide for discipline in middle school. So if you are either middle school or elementary, these are two really strong resources that will both start with the proactive steps. Many of the things that we shared with you already this evening, and working to, I've done all these things proactively. What are the small amount of things that I need to do reactively to support some of the students that I know who need some extra support or are presenting challenging behaviors? Another or two other resources are what we call quick coaching guides. They almost look like a folder, and they have just a wealth of information on specific topics. These two are creating welcoming classroom environments because we want the environments to be space where students want to be and where they feel engaged and where they feel seen and heard. And the other one is seeing that students belong and are significant, which are really key pieces that we want to help students feel when they're in our classroom spaces. Just so you know, upcoming webinars. So this was the second one in our series. We've got 2 more to go. In October, we have successful parent-teacher conferences. And so we'll hear from 2 parent and teachers and how they navigate parent-teacher conferences and some strategies they have for those. And then our November webinar is supporting strategies for academic engagement. So we'll find out more about strategies and practices that help with that, but also leveraging the natural learning cycle to do that. And if you are interested in bringing Responsive Classroom to your school or your district, you can consult Educational Partnership at crslearn.org, or you can visit our website. You can also email Joe or myself if you have questions or if there's something that we shared with you tonight that you want more on. We do have a few minutes for a few questions. I don't know if there were some that came through in the Q&A, Joe, that you're like, we should jump on this particular question.
If
it came through the chat, I missed it with all of all of the different
I think there were a couple
great
that came through the
ideas.
chat that I did not catch. I think all the ones that came through the question and answer, I think we're good on. But
Mhm.
what I would encourage everybody to do is, if there's a specific question that you'd like us to take a swing at, we'll be happy to, and you can just drop that in the chat now. But with that said, before
Or
we
in the
get,
Q&A, just in case we miss it in the chat.
yeah, absolutely. And I just want to echo what Jane said, and in the fact that we respect so much what you all are doing. We know that the past couple of years have been absolutely challenging, and we also know that some students are coming to class and they have skills that they've never had before, stronger than they've ever had.
Mhm.
Other kids are coming back, and there's some significant gaps, and so we just, our emails are there. We will be more than happy to answer any questions that we can.